"We succeeded by cutting out the useless employees who held us back," Jason declared from the stage, his voice booming through the conference hall. The crowd erupted in applause as cameras flashed around him. Reworded. Jason's booming voice echoed through the conference hall as he proclaimed, "Our success came from removing the unproductive employees who hindered our progress." The audience burst into applause, and a flurry of camera flashes illuminated him. I sat frozen at table 12, watching our biggest launch event transform into my public execution. The irony wasn't lost on me. Reworded. Paralyzed at table 12, I watched as what should have been our most significant launch event turned into my public shaming. I was keenly aware of the cruel irony of the situation. After 14 years of keeping this company compliant and profitable, I was being branded as dead weight. "My name is Denise Holloway and I'm 52 years old." Reworded. Despite spending 14 years ensuring the company's compliance and profitability, I was now being labeled as a burden. "I'm Denise Holloway, a 52-year-old. For over a decade, I had been the chief financial officer at Virepoint Dynamics, a mid-sized manufacturing company based in Portland, Oregon." Reworded. For more than 10 years, I served as the chief financial officer for Virepoint Dynamics, a medium-sized manufacturing firm located in Portland, Oregon. While others chased headlines and glory, I worked behind the scenes, ensuring our books were clean, our partnerships solid, and our compliance flawless. Reworded. I preferred to stay in the background, working diligently to guarantee our financial records were accurate, our partnerships were secure, and our adherence to regulations was perfect, while others sought public recognition. I wasn't the type to give flashy presentations or schmooze at networking events. Reworded. I didn't have a knack for delivering flashy presentations or mingling socially at professional gatherings. I was the woman who made sure the numbers added up and the legal documents were bulletproof. Reworded. My role was to meticulously verify the financial data and ensure all legal paperwork was completely secure. But apparently that wasn't enough for Jason Wexler, our new CEO, who had swooped in 6 months ago with promises of modernization and growth. Reworded. However, my approach didn't satisfy Jason Wexler, our new CEO, who arrived 6 months earlier promising to modernize and expand the company. From day one, he made it clear that my methodical approach didn't align with his vision of a dynamic, forward-thinking organization. Reworded. Immediately, he expressed that my careful, systematic style was not what he envisioned for a progressive, innovative company. He wanted yes-men who would rubber-stamp his aggressive expansion plans, not someone who asked uncomfortable questions about inflated projections and questionable vendor agreements. Reworded. He sought subordinates who would blindly approve his ambitious expansion strategies, not a person who would challenge him with difficult inquiries about unrealistic forecasts and dubious vendor contracts. As I watched Jason bask in the spotlight, describing our latest product line as revolutionary, I couldn't help but think about the unsigned audit report sitting in my office safe. Reworded. Seeing Jason revel in the attention while touting our newest product line as groundbreaking, my mind went to the unapproved audit report locked away in my office. The one that detailed discrepancies I had discovered just last week. The one I had refused to certify until we addressed the irregularities. Reworded. That report outlined the irregularities I had found the previous week, which I had refused to approve until we resolved the issues. Jason had brushed off my concerns, insisting we could clean up the details later, but I knew better. Reworded. Jason had dismissed my worries, claiming we could fix the issues later, but I was certain that was a mistake. I had spent my entire career building a reputation for integrity, and I wasn't about to compromise it now. Reworded. Having dedicated my whole career to establishing a reputation for honesty, I was unwilling to jeopardize it at this time. The audience hung on Jason's every word as he painted a picture of unprecedented success and limitless potential. Reworded. The crowd was captivated by Jason's speech, listening intently as he described a future of unparalleled triumph and boundless opportunities. Investors nodded approvingly, their checkbooks practically visible in their eyes. Reworded. Investors showed their approval by nodding, their eagerness to invest almost tangible. I noticed several board members scattered throughout the crowd, all wearing satisfied smiles. Reworded. I saw multiple board members scattered among the audience, each of them looking pleased. They had no idea what was really happening behind the scenes. Reworded. They were completely unaware of the true situation behind the company's public facade. Security guards began moving through the crowd, their destination obvious. Reworded. The security staff started to advance through the attendees, and it was clear where they were heading. I had expected this moment ever since Jason called me into his office that morning and delivered the news with his characteristic smirk. Reworded. I had been bracing for this since Jason's morning call to his office, where he fired me with his typical smug grin. Your services are no longer required, Denise. We're going in a different direction. Reworded. We no longer need your services, Denise. We're heading in a new direction. He had timed my termination perfectly right before our biggest event, ensuring maximum humiliation. Reworded. By firing me just before our most important event, he had deliberately orchestrated the timing for my maximum public disgrace. But as the guards approached my table, I stood up calmly and reached for the black folder I had prepared. Reworded. As the guards drew near, I rose to my feet without panic and picked up the black folder I had brought. Something told me this evening wasn't going to unfold exactly as Jason had planned. Reworded. I had a feeling that the night was not going to proceed according to Jason's script. Looking back, I should have seen the writing on the wall months earlier. Reworded. In retrospect, I should have recognized the warning signs many months before. Jason had arrived at Verpoint Dynamics with great fanfare, recruited by our board after our previous CEO announced his retirement. Reworded. Jason's arrival at Verpoint Dynamics was widely celebrated. He was hired by the board after our former CEO stepped down. The industry publications had heralded him as a visionary leader who had transformed his previous company from a regional player into a national powerhouse. Reworded. Business magazines had hailed him as a visionary who had turned his former company from a small regional business into a major national one. What they failed to mention was that he had left that company just before a federal investigation into accounting irregularities. Reworded. They conveniently omitted the fact that he had left his last company right before it came under federal investigation for financial misconduct. I had done my research. Of course, it was my job to be thorough. Reworded. I had investigated his background, as due diligence was part of my professional responsibilities. When I brought my concerns to the board, they dismissed them as typical resistance to change. Reworded. The board dismissed my worries, seeing them as the usual pushback against new ideas. Jason brings exactly the kind of innovative thinking we need. Board Chairman Robert Hayes had told me during our quarterly meeting. Reworded. During our quarterly meeting, Board Chairman Robert Hayes stated, Jason's innovative mindset is precisely what we require. Sometimes you have to take calculated risks to achieve extraordinary results. Reworded. To get exceptional outcomes, it's sometimes necessary to take carefully considered chances. Those calculated risks had started almost immediately. Reworded. Those strategic risks began almost at once. Jason began pushing for aggressive revenue targets that seemed divorced from reality. Reworded. Jason started advocating for ambitious sales goals that appeared unrealistic and unattainable. He wanted to expand into new markets without proper research, sign contracts with vendors I had never properly vetted, and pursue partnerships that made my compliance instincts scream. Rewa text. He sought to enter new markets without adequate research, sign agreements with unvetted vendors, and form partnerships that set off every alarm in my compliance-focused mind. Every time I raised questions, he would smile that condescending smile and tell me I was being unnecessarily cautious. Reworded. Whenever I raised concerns, he would give me a patronizing smile and say I was being overly careful. The breaking point had come 3 weeks ago during our monthly executive meeting. Reworded. The situation reached its climax 3 weeks ago during our regular monthly executive meeting. Jason had presented a proposal to backdate several vendor agreements to inflate our quarterly numbers. Reworded. Jason proposed a plan to falsify our quarterly earnings by backdating several agreements with vendors. The room had gone silent as he outlined his plan, all eyes eventually turning to me. Reworded. The room fell silent as he described his plan, and everyone's gaze eventually shifted to me. I had looked him straight in the eye and said, "I cannot and will not sign off on any documentation that misrepresents our financial position." Reworded. I looked directly at him and stated, "I will not approve any documents that inaccurately reflect our financial standing." His mask had slipped for just a moment, revealing the cold calculation beneath his charming exterior. Reworded. For a fleeting moment, his facade dropped, exposing the ruthless calculation hidden behind his smooth demeanor. "Denise, I understand your concerns, but sometimes we need to think creatively about our reporting." Reworded. "Denise, I hear your worries, but we sometimes have to be innovative with our reporting. This is standard practice in the industry." Reworded. "This is a common procedure in our field." "No, Jason, it isn't," I had replied firmly. "And even if it were, it would still be fraud." Reworded. "That's not true, Jason," I asserted. "And even if it were, it would still be illegal." The tension in the room had been palpable. Reworded. The atmosphere in the room was incredibly tense. Other executives had shifted uncomfortably in their seats, clearly torn between supporting their new CEO and backing the woman who had kept the company out of legal trouble for over a decade. Reworded. The other executives fidgeted uneasily, caught between siding with their new leader and supporting the person who had protected the company from legal issues for more than 10 years. In the end, most had remained silent, which told me everything I needed to know about where their loyalties lay. Reworded. Ultimately, their silence spoke volumes about their allegiance. That night, I had gone home and begun documenting everything. Reworded. That evening, I went home and started recording every detail. Every questionable decision, every inappropriate request, every corner Jason had tried to get me to cut. Reworded. I documented every dubious choice, every improper demand, and every unethical shortcut Jason had attempted to take. I had photographed emails, copied files, and created a comprehensive record of his attempts to manipulate our financial reporting. Reworded. I took pictures of emails, duplicated files, and built a detailed record of his efforts to falsify our financial data. Call it professional paranoia or simply good sense, but I had learned long ago that when integrity was at stake, documentation was your best defense. Reworded. Whether it was professional caution or just good judgment, I had learned that when your integrity is on the line, having thorough records is your best protection. My assistant, Catherine, had noticed my late nights and weekend work sessions. Reworded. Catherine, my assistant, had noticed I was working late and on weekends. "Is everything okay, Denise?" she had asked last Friday, as I locked yet another set of files in my office safe. Reworded. "Is everything all right, Denise?" she asked me last Friday as I put more files into my office safe. Catherine had been with the company for 8 years and knew me well enough to recognize when something was seriously wrong. Reworded. Having worked at the company for 8 years, Catherine was familiar enough with me to know when something was deeply amiss. "Just being extra careful," I had told her, which was both true and a massive understatement. Reworded. "I'm just being cautious," I told her, which was accurate but also a significant understatement. The revelation that would change everything came the week before the launch event. Hidden in a routine audit report that should have been straightforward. Reworded. The critical discovery that would change everything was found a week before the event, buried within what should have been a simple audit report. I had been reviewing our third quarter financials when I noticed discrepancies in several key accounts, revenue numbers that didn't match our actual sales records, expenses that had been mysteriously reclassified, vendor payments that corresponded to contracts I had never seen. Reworded. While examining our third quarter financial data, I spotted inconsistencies in several important accounts. Income figures that didn't align with our actual sales, expenses that had been oddly reclassified, and vendor payments linked to contracts I had never seen before. I spent the entire weekend in my office cross-referencing documents and following paper trails. Reworded. I spent the whole weekend at my office, meticulously comparing documents and tracing the flow of paperwork. What I discovered made my blood run cold. Reworded. My findings were shocking and chilling. Jason hadn't just been pushing aggressive accounting practices. He had been actively falsifying records. Reworded. Jason wasn't just encouraging risky accounting. He was deliberately forging documents. Revenue had been inflated by nearly 15% through a combination of backdated contracts and fictitious sales. Reworded. Our revenue was artificially boosted by almost 15% using a mix of backdated contracts and made-up sales figures. Expenses had been manipulated to create the appearance of improved margins. Reworded. Expenses were altered to create the illusion of better profit margins. Even our cash flow statements had been doctored. Reworded. Even our cash flow reports had been tampered with. The audit firm we had been working with for years, McKenna and Associates, had already begun their preliminary review. Reworded. McKenna and Associates, the audit firm we'd used for years, had already started their initial review. I knew their senior partner, David McKenna, personally, and I trusted his integrity. Reworded. I knew and trusted the firm's senior partner, David McKenna. When I called him Sunday evening to discuss my findings, his voice grew grave. Reworded. When I called him on Sunday night to share what I had found, his tone became very serious. "Denise, these numbers don't match what we've been provided," he said after I walked him through my discoveries. Reworded. "Denise," he said after I explained my findings, "the numbers we were given don't line up with this. If what you're telling me is accurate, we're looking at systematic fraud." Reworded. "If your information is correct, this looks like organized fraud." "That's exactly what we're looking at," I replied. "The question is, what do we do about it?" Reworded. "That's precisely what it is," I responded. "The issue now is how we handle it." David was quiet for a long moment. "We need to halt the audit immediately until these discrepancies can be resolved. I cannot sign off on financial statements that I know to be fraudulent." Reworded. David paused for a while. "We have to stop the audit right away until these inconsistencies are cleared up. I won't certify financial reports that I know are fraudulent." Monday morning I requested an emergency meeting with Jason. Reworded. I asked for an urgent meeting with Jason on Monday morning. I walked into his office with a copy of the preliminary audit findings and my own documentation of the irregularities. Reworded. I entered his office carrying the initial audit results and my personal evidence of the misconduct. His reaction was not what I had expected. Reworded. He responded in a way I hadn't anticipated. Instead of denial or even anger, Jason had leaned back in his chair and smiled. Reworded. Rather than being angry or denying anything, Jason relaxed in his chair with a smile. "Denise, you're making this much more complicated than it needs to be. These are simply different ways of presenting the same information. Nothing we're doing is technically illegal." Reworded. "Denise, you're overcomplicating things. This is just a different way of showing the same data. What we're doing isn't technically against the law." "Jason, this is fraud," I said, placing the documents on his desk. "We cannot present these numbers to investors or the board. I won't sign off on them." Reworded. "This is fraud, Jason," I stated, putting the papers on his desk. "We can't show these figures to investors or the board. I refuse to authorize them." His smile never wavered. "Then perhaps it's time we discussed your future with this company." Reworded. He continued to smile. "Maybe it's time to talk about your continued employment here." The threat was clear, but I held my ground. "Are you asking me to certify false financial statements?" Reworded. The warning was obvious, but I didn't back down. "Are you telling me to approve fraudulent financial reports?" "I'm asking you to be a team player." Reworded. "I'm asking you to cooperate with the team." I stood up and gathered my documents. "Then I guess we have a problem." Reworded. I got up, collected my papers and said, "It seems we have an issue then." That conversation had sealed my fate, but it had also crystallized my resolve. Reworded. That exchange determined my future, but it also solidified my determination. Jason could fire me, humiliate me, even destroy my reputation, but he could not force me to compromise my integrity. Reworded. Jason had the power to dismiss me, embarrass me, and ruin my good name, but he couldn't make me betray my principles. As I prepared for what I knew would be my final week at Virepoint Dynamics, I made sure every piece of evidence was carefully preserved and organized. Reworded. Knowing this was my last week at Virepoint Dynamics, I meticulously preserved and arranged all the evidence. If Jason wanted to play hardball, I would be ready. Reworded. I was prepared to fight back if Jason wanted to make this difficult. The launch event would be the perfect stage for the truth to finally come to light. Reworded. The launch event was the ideal setting to finally reveal the truth. The evening of the launch event arrived with all the pomp and circumstance Jason had envisioned. Reworded. The evening of the launch event was as grand and formal as Jason had imagined. The ballroom at the Everhart Hotel was decorated with Verentoint's corporate colors, and servers circulated with expensive wine and catered appetizers. Reworded. The Everhart Hotel's ballroom was adorned with Virepoint's colors, and attendants served upscale wine and hors d'oeuvres. Industry journalists mingled with potential investors, board members, and key clients. Reworded. Journalists from the industry socialized with prospective investors, board members, and important clients. It was exactly the kind of high-profile gathering where Jason thrived. Reworded. This was precisely the type of prominent event Jason excelled at. I arrived fashionably late, wearing my best black suit and carrying the folder that would change everything. Reworded. I showed up a bit late, dressed in my finest black suit and holding the folder that would alter the course of events. Catherine had offered to attend with me for moral support, but I had declined. Reworded. Catherine had offered to come with me for support, but I had refused her offer. This was something I needed to do alone. Reworded. This was a task I had to complete by myself. As I entered the ballroom, I caught sight of Jason near the stage, surrounded by admirers and holding court like the consummate showman he was. Reworded. Upon entering the ballroom, I spotted Jason near the stage, a crowd of admirers around him, playing the role of the ultimate showman. The presentation began at 7 p.m. sharp. Reworded. The presentation started promptly at 7 p.m. Jason took the stage with practiced confidence, his smile bright enough to power the entire hotel. Reworded. Jason stepped onto the stage with a well-rehearsed confidence, his dazzling smile illuminating the room. He spoke passionately about innovation, market disruption, and Virepoint's bright future. Reworded. He spoke enthusiastically about cutting-edge ideas, revolutionizing the market, and Virepoint's promising future. The audience was captivated, hanging on his every word as he painted a picture of unprecedented growth and profitability. Reworded. The audience was enthralled, listening to every word as he described a vision of unparalleled growth and financial success. Our third quarter results exceeded all expectations, he declared, gesturing toward the large screen displaying our supposedly stellar financial performance. Reworded. Our third quarter results surpassed all predictions, he announced, gesturing to the large screen that showed our supposedly outstanding financial figures. Revenue is up 18% year-over-year, and our profit margins have improved significantly thanks to strategic operational improvements. Reworded. Revenue has increased by 18% compared to last year, and our profit margins have grown considerably due to strategic operational changes. I felt my stomach tighten as I watched him present the fraudulent numbers with such conviction. Reworded. I felt a knot in my stomach as I saw him confidently present the fake numbers. Several investors in the audience were nodding approvingly, clearly impressed by what they perceived as outstanding financial health. Reworded. Several investors were nodding in agreement, clearly impressed by what they believed to be a sign of excellent financial well-being. Board Chairman Robert Hayes beamed from his front row seat, obviously pleased with his choice of CEO. Reworded. Board Chairman Robert Hayes smiled broadly from the front row, clearly content with his selection of CEO. Jason continued his presentation, outlining ambitious expansion plans and projected growth targets that were based entirely on the falsified financial foundation he had constructed. Reworded. Jason went on with his presentation, describing ambitious expansion projects and growth forecasts that were built entirely on the fabricated financial data he had created. "We're not just growing," he proclaimed. "We're revolutionizing how this industry thinks about efficiency and profitability." Reworded. "We're doing more than just expanding," he announced. "We're changing how the industry views efficiency and financial success." Then came the moment I had been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. Reworded. Then came the moment I had both feared and looked forward to. Jason's expression grew serious as he prepared to address what he called necessary organizational changes. Reworded. Jason's face became serious as he got ready to talk about what he referred to as essential company restructuring. "Success requires difficult decisions," he began, his voice taking on a more somber tone. Reworded. "Being successful means making hard choices," he started, his voice becoming more solemn. "To achieve the results you see today, we had to eliminate inefficiencies and remove obstacles to progress." Reworded. "To get the outcomes you see now, we needed to get rid of unproductive processes and people who were in the way of progress. Sometimes that means parting ways with employees who are resistant to change or unable to adapt to new methodologies." Reworded. "This sometimes involves letting go of employees who resist change or can't adjust to new ways of working." The audience listened intently, clearly buying into his narrative of tough but necessary leadership decisions. Reworded. The audience paid close attention, clearly accepting his story about making difficult but essential leadership choices. I could see several investors nodding and understanding, accepting the premise that successful companies sometimes had to make hard choices about personnel. Reworded. I saw several investors nodding in agreement, accepting the idea that successful businesses sometimes have to make tough decisions about their staff. "We succeeded by cutting out the useless employees who held us back," Jason declared with renewed energy, his smile returning. Reworded. Jason's smile returned, and he stated with renewed vigor, "Our success came from getting rid of the unproductive employees who were holding us back." The crowd erupted in enthusiastic applause, and I felt the weight of every eye in the room. Reworded. The crowd broke into thunderous applause, and I felt as though everyone was staring at me. Some attendees knew exactly who he was referring to, and I could feel their gazes burning into me. Reworded. Some in the audience knew exactly who he meant, and I could feel their stares. Security guards began moving through the crowd, their destination unmistakably my table. Reworded. Security personnel started to walk through the attendees, their path clearly leading toward me. Jason had orchestrated this moment perfectly. Public humiliation followed by physical removal, all in front of the people whose opinions mattered most to our industry. Reworded. Jason had planned this moment flawlessly. Public shame followed by a physical escort out, all in front of the most influential people in our industry. It was a masterclass in character assassination. Reworded. It was a perfectly executed act of character destruction. But as the guards approached, I stood up calmly and began walking toward the stage. Reworded. As the guards got closer, I rose to my feet without any sign of panic and started walking toward the stage. The crowd grew quiet, sensing that something unexpected was happening. Reworded. The crowd fell silent, sensing that something unforeseen was about to occur. Jason's smile faltered slightly as he noticed my movement, but he quickly recovered, probably assuming I was about to make some kind of desperate plea or emotional outburst. Reworded. Jason's smile wavered for a moment when he saw me move, but he quickly regained his composure, likely thinking I was about to plead with him or cause a scene. I climbed the steps to the stage with measured composure. Reworded. I ascended the stage stairs with calm and steady steps. My black folder clutched firmly in my hands. Reworded. I held the black folder tightly in my hands. The ballroom had fallen completely silent. Hundreds of eyes focused on the unfolding drama. Reworded. The ballroom was absolutely quiet, with hundreds of eyes fixed on the unfolding scene. Jason maintained his confident demeanor, extending his hand as if to shake mine in some gracious gesture of farewell. Reworded. Jason kept his self-assured posture, offering his hand as if for a formal goodbye. Instead, I handed him the folder. Reworded. Instead, I gave him the folder. "Congratulations on your success," I said clearly, my voice carrying throughout the silent room. Reworded. "Congratulations on your achievement," I said in a clear voice that could be heard by everyone in the quiet room. My tone was perfectly cordial, even warm, which seemed to catch him off guard. Reworded. My voice was friendly, even warm, which seemed to surprise him. Without another word, I turned and walked off the stage, through the crowd, and out of the ballroom. Reworded. Without saying anything else, I turned and left the stage, making my way through the crowd and out of the room. Behind me, I could hear the murmur of confused voices as Jason opened the folder that would destroy everything he had built. Reworded. I could hear a confused buzz behind me as Jason opened the folder that would dismantle everything he had worked for. The folder contained everything. 14 pages of meticulously documented evidence that would unravel Jason's carefully constructed web of deception. Reworded. The folder held everything. 14 pages of carefully prepared evidence that would expose Jason's elaborate network of lies. Jason continued his presentation, outlining ambitious expansion plans and projected growth targets that were based entirely on the falsified financial foundation he had constructed. Reworded. Jason went on with his presentation, describing ambitious expansion projects and growth forecasts that were built entirely on the fabricated financial data he had created. "We're not just growing," he proclaimed. "We're revolutionizing how this industry thinks about efficiency and profitability." Reworded. "We're doing more than just expanding," he announced. "We're changing how the industry views efficiency and financial success." Then came the moment I had been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. Reworded. Then came the moment I had both feared and looked forward to. Jason's expression grew serious as he prepared to address what he called necessary organizational changes. Reworded. Jason's face became serious as he got ready to talk about what he referred to as essential company restructuring. "Success requires difficult decisions," he began, his voice taking on a more somber tone. Reworded. "Being successful means making hard choices," he started, his voice becoming more solemn. "To achieve the results you see today, we had to eliminate inefficiencies and remove obstacles to progress." Reworded. "To get the outcomes you see now, we needed to get rid of unproductive processes and people who were in the way of progress. Sometimes that means parting ways with employees who are resistant to change or unable to adapt to new methodologies." Reworded. "This sometimes involves letting go of employees who resist change or can't adjust to new ways of working." The audience listened intently, clearly buying into his narrative of tough but necessary leadership decisions. Reworded. The audience paid close attention, clearly accepting his story about making difficult but essential leadership choices. I could see several investors nodding and understanding, accepting the premise that successful companies sometimes had to make hard choices about personnel. Reworded. I saw several investors nodding in agreement, accepting the idea that successful businesses sometimes have to make tough decisions about their staff. "We succeeded by cutting out the useless employees who held us back," Jason declared with renewed energy, his smile returning. Reworded. Jason's smile returned, and he stated with renewed vigor, "Our success came from getting rid of the unproductive employees who were holding us back." The crowd erupted in enthusiastic applause, and I felt the weight of every eye in the room. Reworded. The crowd broke into thunderous applause, and I felt as though everyone was staring at me. Some attendees knew exactly who he was referring to, and I could feel their gazes burning into me. Reworded. Some in the audience knew exactly who he meant, and I could feel their stares. Security guards began moving through the crowd, their destination unmistakably my table. Reworded. Security personnel started to walk through the attendees, their path clearly leading toward me. Jason had orchestrated this moment perfectly. Public humiliation followed by physical removal, all in front of the people whose opinions mattered most to our industry. Reworded. Jason had planned this moment flawlessly. Public shame followed by a physical escort out, all in front of the most influential people in our industry. It was a masterclass in character assassination. Reworded. It was a perfectly executed act of character destruction. But as the guards approached, I stood up calmly and began walking toward the stage. Reworded. As the guards got closer, I rose to my feet without any sign of panic and started walking toward the stage. The crowd grew quiet, sensing that something unexpected was happening. Reworded. The crowd fell silent, sensing that something unforeseen was about to occur. Jason's smile faltered slightly as he noticed my movement, but he quickly recovered, probably assuming I was about to make some kind of desperate plea or emotional outburst. Reworded. Jason's smile wavered for a moment when he saw me move, but he quickly regained his composure, likely thinking I was about to plead with him or cause a scene. I climbed the steps to the stage with measured composure. Reworded. I ascended the stage stairs with calm and steady steps. My black folder clutched firmly in my hands. Reworded. I held the black folder tightly in my hands. The ballroom had fallen completely silent. Hundreds of eyes focused on the unfolding drama. Reworded. The ballroom was absolutely quiet, with hundreds of eyes fixed on the unfolding scene. Jason maintained his confident demeanor, extending his hand as if to shake mine in some gracious gesture of farewell. Reworded. Jason kept his self-assured posture, offering his hand as if for a formal goodbye. Instead, I handed him the folder. Reworded. Instead, I gave him the folder. "Congratulations on your success," I said clearly, my voice carrying throughout the silent room. Reworded. "Congratulations on your achievement," I said in a clear voice that could be heard by everyone in the quiet room. My tone was perfectly cordial, even warm, which seemed to catch him off guard. Reworded. My voice was friendly, even warm, which seemed to surprise him. Without another word, I turned and walked off the stage, through the crowd, and out of the ballroom. Reworded. Without saying anything else, I turned and left the stage, making my way through the crowd and out of the room. Behind me, I could hear the murmur of confused voices as Jason opened the folder that would destroy everything he had built. Reworded. I could hear a confused buzz behind me as Jason opened the folder that would dismantle everything he had worked for. The folder contained everything. 14 pages of meticulously documented evidence that would unravel Jason's carefully constructed web of deception. Reworded. The folder held everything. 14 pages of carefully prepared evidence that would expose Jason's elaborate network of lies. There was silence on the other end as she processed what I was telling her. Reworded. There was a moment of silence as she absorbed what I had just said. Catherine was smart enough to read between the lines. Reworded. Catherine was sharp enough to understand the hidden meaning in my words. "Denise, what was in that folder?" "The truth," I said simply. "Just the truth." Reworded. "Denise, what was in that folder?" "The truth," I replied plainly. "Only the truth." After hanging up, I allowed myself a moment of satisfaction. Reworded. After ending the call, I let myself feel a sense of accomplishment. For months, I had watched Jason manipulate numbers, pressure staff, and build his success on a foundation of lies. Reworded. For months, I had observed Jason falsify data, coerce employees, and build his career on falsehoods. Tonight, that foundation had crumbled in front of the very people he had been trying to impress. Reworded. Tonight, that foundation collapsed right in front of the people he had been working so hard to win over. The applause that had greeted his declaration about cutting useless employees would be the last celebration he would enjoy at Virepoint Dynamics. Reworded. The applause he received for his announcement about firing unproductive employees would be the final moment of triumph he experienced at Virepoint Dynamics. Wednesday morning brought the first wave of consequences. Reworded. Wednesday morning marked the beginning of the fallout. I woke to 17 missed calls and 43 text messages. Reworded. When I woke up, I had 17 missed calls and 43 text messages. The Portland Business Journal had somehow obtained details about the launch event and published an article titled Financial Questions Rock Verpoint Dynamics Following Executive Departure. Reworded. The Portland Business Journal had somehow learned about the launch event and published a story with the headline, Financial Questions Rock Verpoint Dynamics After Executive Leaves. While they were careful to avoid specific allegations, the implication was clear. Reworded. Although they didn't make direct accusations, the message was unmistakable. Something significant had gone wrong. Reworded. A major problem had occurred. By 10 a.m., 3 major investors had formally requested emergency meetings with the board of directors. Reworded. By 10 a.m., 3 key investors had officially asked for urgent meetings with the board. 2 others had sent letters indicating their intention to reevaluate their investment position, pending clarification of recent financial disclosures. Reworded. 2 more had sent letters saying they intended to reconsider their investments, awaiting clarification on the recent financial information. The domino effect I had anticipated was beginning in earnest. Reworded. The chain reaction I had foreseen was now well underway. Catherine called just before noon, her voice tight with anxiety. Reworded. Catherine called shortly before noon, her voice strained and worried. Denise, the office is chaos. Jason called an all-hands meeting this morning, but he looked terrible. He kept saying everything was under control, but nobody believed him. Reworded. Denise, the office is a mess. Jason called a company-wide meeting, but he looked awful. He kept insisting everything was fine, but no one bought it. Then David McKenna showed up with 2 other auditors, and they've been locked in the conference room with Jason and Robert Hayes for hours. Reworded. Then David McKenna arrived with 2 more auditors, and they've been in the conference room with Jason and Robert Hayes for hours. What about staff morale? I asked, genuinely concerned for my former colleagues. Reworded. How's everyone feeling? I asked, genuinely worried about my former coworkers. People are scared. There are rumors about layoffs, about the company being in financial trouble. Reworded. People are frightened. Rumors are flying about job cuts and the company being in financial distress. Some people are saying you were right all along about Jason, that he was cooking the books. Reworded. Some are saying you were right about Jason all along, that he was committing accounting fraud. The validation felt hollow. Reworded. Being proven right didn't bring me any real joy. Being proven right about Jason's corruption provided no joy when it meant potential hardship for innocent employees who had simply been trying to do their jobs. Reworded. There was no satisfaction in being right about Jason's corruption when it meant hardship for innocent employees who were just doing their work. These were people I had worked alongside for years, professionals who deserved better than to have their careers disrupted by one man's greed and ambition. Reworded. I had worked with these professionals for years, and they deserved more than to have their careers ruined by one person's avarice and self-interest. Thursday brought news that Jason had been placed on administrative leave pending a comprehensive audit. Reworded. On Thursday, the news broke that Jason had been put on leave while the company conducted a full audit. The announcement came through a TUR press release that cited ongoing financial review processes and the need for complete transparency during the evaluation period. Reworded. The company announced this in a press release, mentioning an ongoing financial review and the need for complete openness during the investigation. Reading between the lines, it was clear the board was positioning itself to cut ties with Jason entirely. Reworded. It was clear from the language that the board was preparing to completely sever ties with Jason. Friday afternoon, I received an unexpected call from Marcus Wright, CEO of Bridge Manufacturing, one of Vireoant's primary competitors. Reworded. On Friday afternoon, I got a surprising call from Marcus Wright, the CEO of Bridge Manufacturing, a major competitor of Virepoint. I had known Marcus professionally for several years through industry events, and I respected his reputation for ethical leadership. Reworded. I had known Marcus for a few years from industry events and respected his reputation for being an ethical leader. Denise, I heard about the situation at Virepoint, he said without preamble. Reworded. Denise, I heard what happened at Virepoint, he said directly. I also heard that you were the one who exposed whatever was going on over there. Reworded. I also heard you were the one who revealed what was happening there. Word travels fast in our industry, I replied carefully. Reworded. News spreads quickly in our field, I responded cautiously. It does when someone shows real courage. Listen, I know this probably isn't the best timing, but I'd like to discuss an opportunity with you. Reworded. It does when someone displays genuine bravery. I know this might not be the best time, but I'd like to talk to you about a job opening. We're looking for someone to head our financial operations, someone with unquestionable integrity and deep industry experience. Reworded. We need someone to lead our financial department, someone with impeccable integrity and extensive experience in the industry. The offer caught me off guard. Reworded. I was surprised by the offer. In my focus on doing the right thing at Virepoint, I hadn't given much thought to what would come next for my career. Reworded. I had been so focused on doing the right thing at Virepoint that I hadn't considered what my next career move would be. The idea of joining a competitor, especially one with Bright Ridge's stellar reputation, was intriguing. Reworded. The thought of working for a rival company, especially one with Brightridge's outstanding reputation, was appealing. I appreciate the interest, Marcus, but I should probably let things settle down before making any major decisions. Reworded. I'm grateful for your interest, Marcus, but I think I should wait for things to calm down before I make a big decision. Of course, Denise, what you did took real guts. The whole industry is talking about it. There are a lot of people who respect what you stood up for. Reworded. Of course, Denise. What you did was very brave. Everyone in the industry is talking about it. Many people respect you for what you stood for. After hanging up, I realized that my professional reputation, which I had worried might be damaged by the confrontation with Jason, was actually being enhanced. Reworded. After the call ended, I understood that my professional reputation, which I had feared might be ruined by my confrontation with Jason, was actually being improved. The industry was recognizing my actions not as corporate disloyalty, but as professional integrity. Reworded. The industry saw my actions not as a betrayal of the company, but as an act of professional honesty. Other executives were seeing what happened at Virepoint as a cautionary tale about the importance of ethical leadership. Reworded. Other executives were viewing the events at Virepoint as a warning about the necessity of ethical leadership. The following week would bring even more dramatic developments, but for now, I allowed myself to feel cautiously optimistic about both the immediate consequences of my actions and the longer-term possibilities for my career. Reworded. The next week would bring even more dramatic news, but for the time being, I let myself feel a sense of guarded optimism about both the immediate effects of my actions and the future possibilities for my career. The final blow came exactly 1 week after the launch event, delivered with the cold precision of a federal investigation. Reworded. The final impact occurred exactly 1 week after the launch event, and it came with the chilling precision of a federal investigation. I was having coffee at my kitchen table when Catherine called with news that would end Jason's career permanently. Reworded. I was drinking coffee at my kitchen table when Catherine called to tell me news that would permanently end Jason's career. Denise, the FBI is here, she whispered into the phone. They arrived about an hour ago with warrants. They're seizing computers, files, everything. Jason was arrested at his house this morning. Reworded. Denise, the FBI is here, she whispered. They showed up about an hour ago with search warrants. They're taking all the computers and files. Jason was arrested at his home this morning. The speed of the investigation surprised even me. Reworded. The swiftness of the investigation was surprising even to me. Apparently, one of the investors who had left the launch event had contacts within the Securities and Exchange Commission. Reworded. It seemed that an investor who had left the event had connections with the Securities and Exchange Commission. The folder I had handed Jason hadn't just exposed him to our board and investors. It had triggered a federal investigation into securities fraud. Reworded. The folder I gave Jason didn't just expose him to the board and investors. It also prompted a federal investigation into securities fraud. What about the staff? I asked, my concern for my former colleagues overriding any satisfaction I might have felt about Jason's arrest. Reworded. What's happening with the staff? I asked, my concern for my old co-workers outweighing any satisfaction I felt about Jason's arrest. Most people are being sent home while they complete the seizure. Human Resources is telling everyone that the company will continue operating, but honestly, nobody knows what's going to happen. Reworded. Most people are being sent home while the authorities finish seizing the documents. HR is telling everyone the company will keep running, but frankly, no one knows what's going to happen. The afternoon news confirmed what Catherine had told me and more. Reworded. The afternoon news verified Catherine's story and added more details. Jason had been charged with securities fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy to manipulate financial records. Reworded. Jason was indicted for securities fraud, wire fraud, and conspiring to falsify financial documents. The charges carried potential sentences of up to 20 years in federal prison. Reworded. He faced the possibility of up to 20 years in federal prison for the charges. Verentoint stock, which had been trading at record highs just days earlier, had been suspended pending the investigation. Reworded. Virepoint stock, which had reached record highs just days before, was suspended from trading while the investigation was underway. By evening, the story had reached the national business news. Reworded. By evening, the story was being reported by national business media. CNBC ran a segment about corporate fraud in mid-sized manufacturing companies using Virepoint as a case study in how quickly fraudulent accounting practices could unravel. Reworded. CNBC aired a report on corporate fraud in mid-sized manufacturing firms, using Virepoint as an example of how quickly fraudulent accounting can fall apart. The reporter noted that the investigation had been triggered by whistleblower evidence provided by a former executive with intimate knowledge of the company's financial practices. Reworded. The journalist pointed out that the investigation was initiated by a tip from a former executive who had detailed knowledge of the company's finances. Robert Hayes resigned from the board that same day along with 2 other directors who had been instrumental in hiring Jason. Reworded. Robert Hayes resigned from the board on the same day, as did 2 other directors who had played a key role in hiring Jason. The remaining board members appointed an interim CEO and announced their intention to cooperate fully with federal investigators. Reworded. The remaining board members named a temporary CEO and said they would fully cooperate with the federal investigation. They also issued a public statement acknowledging that serious financial irregularities had been discovered and promising full transparency throughout the investigation. Reworded. They also released a public statement admitting that significant financial misconduct had been found and pledging complete openness during the investigation. The irony was not lost on me. Reworded. I wasn't unaware of the irony. Jason had branded me as a useless employee who held the company back. Reworded. Jason had labeled me as an unproductive employee who was a detriment to the company. In reality, I had been the only thing standing between Virepoint and complete destruction. Reworded. The truth was, I had been the only one who prevented Virepoint from being completely destroyed. My refusal to certify fraudulent financial statements hadn't just protected my own integrity. Reworded. By refusing to approve the fraudulent financial reports, I didn't just protect my own integrity. It had saved the company from even deeper legal troubles. Reworded. It had also saved the company from facing even more serious legal problems. 3 months later, I was sitting in the executive conference room at Brightridge Manufacturing reviewing quarterly reports as their new chief financial officer. Reworded. 3 months later, I was in the executive conference room at Brightridge Manufacturing, reviewing quarterly reports as their new chief financial officer. Marcus Wright had renewed his offer after the dust settled at Verentoint, and I had accepted, drawn by his commitment to ethical leadership and transparent operations. Reworded. After things calmed down at Virepoint, Marcus Wright made his offer again, and I accepted, impressed by his dedication to ethical leadership and transparent business practices. The transition had been remarkably smooth. Reworded. The change was incredibly seamless. Britt Ridge's financial systems were exactly what I had hoped to find, meticulously maintained, fully compliant, and refreshingly straightforward. Reworded. Brightridge's financial systems were everything I had hoped for. Carefully kept, completely compliant, and refreshingly simple. After years of fighting Jason's attempts to manipulate our numbers, working with clean books felt like a relief I hadn't realized I needed. Reworded. After years of battling Jason's efforts to manipulate the numbers, working with clean records was a relief I didn't know I was missing. Firepoint had survived, though barely. Reworded. Firepoint managed to survive, but just barely. The interim CEO had managed to steady the company by implementing aggressive cost-cutting measures and completely overhauling their financial reporting systems. Reworded. The temporary CEO was able to stabilize the company by making drastic spending cuts and completely changing their financial reporting systems. They had also hired McKenna and Associates to conduct a comprehensive audit and implement new oversight procedures. Reworded. They also hired McKenna and Associates to perform a full audit and put new oversight processes in place. Catherine had stayed on as part of the skeleton crew, working to rebuild the company's reputation and operations. Reworded. Catherine remained with the small staff, working to restore the company's reputation and operations. Jason's trial was scheduled for the following year, but his legal team had already indicated they were seeking a plea agreement. Reworded. Jason's trial was set for the next year, but his lawyers had already said they were looking for a plea deal. Industry analysts estimated that his fraud had cost investors over $12 million in inflated valuations and false projections. Reworded. Industry experts believed his fraud had cost investors more than $12 million through inflated company values and false forecasts. Several civil lawsuits had been filed by pension funds and individual investors who had made decisions based on the fraudulent financial statements. Reworded. Several civil lawsuits were filed by pension funds and individual investors who had made investment choices based on the false financial reports. The case had become a talking point throughout our industry about the importance of financial oversight and the courage required to speak truth to power. Reworded. The case became a frequent topic of conversation in our industry, highlighting the importance of financial supervision and the bravery needed to confront authority with the truth. I had been invited to speak at 3 conferences about corporate governance and ethical leadership, though I had declined all requests. Reworded. I had received invitations to speak at 3 conferences about corporate governance and ethical leadership, but I turned them all down. I preferred to let my actions speak for themselves. Reworded. I preferred that my actions stand on their own. As I reviewed Bright Ridge's impeccable financial records, I reflected on how dramatically my life had changed since that night at the Everhart Hotel. Reworded. While examining Brightridge's flawless financial records, I thought about how much my life had changed since that evening at the Everhart Hotel. Sometimes doing the right thing came with a cost, but sometimes it led to opportunities better than anything you had imagined. Reworded. I realized that doing the right thing sometimes came with a price, but it could also lead to opportunities far better than you could have ever imagined. My phone buzzed with a text from David McKenna. Saw the Bright Ridge announcement. Congratulations on the new position. The industry is lucky to have someone with your integrity in a leadership role. Reworded. I got a text from David McKenna. I saw the Bright Ridge announcement. Congratulations on the new job. The industry is fortunate to have a leader with your level of integrity. Looking back on the path that had brought me here, I felt a quiet satisfaction in knowing that sometimes justice and professional success could align perfectly. Reworded. Reflecting on my journey to this point, I felt a deep sense of contentment, knowing that sometimes doing the right thing and achieving professional success can go hand in hand.